Right, so we shall start. My name's Tom Nancarrow. I have a fruit tree nursery in Devon called Adams Apples. Adams Apples. It's very confusing. There's another chap called Tom Adams who has an apple tree nursery, so it's a bit confusing, but it's okay because we sell trees, so it's fine. Anyway, so I've got a nursery in Devon called Adams Apples. We produce around 20,000 bare root fruit trees every year. A few nut trees we supply as well. A mixture, mostly apples, probably 70% apples, but also all other fruit trees that you could want. And within the apples, because we're in Devon, we obviously specialise in regional varieties. We've got a lot of Devon and Cornwall, Somerset varieties, lots of cider fruit.
And some dulcet ones.
So yeah, that's a little bit about us. We've been running quite a long time. I used to work for my predecessor, and then I took the nursery on in 2018. So I've been running it for 7 years, and we are now the nursery is certified organic. Yeah, so that's good. So today I'm going to talk about a little. Well, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to do a kind of demo, really. It's a bit of a demo on some formative pruning, which is quite an important thing to be doing on young trees. A crucial thing to be doing, really, and to be getting it right. So I'll do a little bit of a demo on that. I'll talk a little bit about, well, just general things to consider growing fruit trees in an organic system, whether that's part of a market garden or, you know, dedicated orchard, either for producing fruit for sale. Perhaps you've got ideas about growing fruit for sale or juicing, whatever, or it might just be for yourself, but the principles are the same, basically. So we'll talk a bit about a few things to consider on that front, and then also, just if there's time, hopefully cover some pest and diseases. So we're going to start at the top. First things first, fruit trees. Now, some of you, probably all of you, might know a bit about fruit trees already, so but I just want to make sure everyone's up to speed. What makes fruit trees different from all your other trees growing out there in the hedges and in the woodlands and things, all your other deciduous trees, are that they're grafted. So, does everyone know that you can't? Well, on the whole, you're not going to get a variety true to type if you plant the seeds, right? So you've got an apple like this, say Adams Pearmain, for example, delicious apple. You think, I'm going to sow the seeds when I've finished eating this, and then I'll grow a tree, and it's going to give me exactly the same apples. Well, it's not, because the seeds in there have got genetic information from 2 parent trees. So the seeds in that apple are unique. You've essentially got new varieties sitting there waiting in every apple, which is part of the reason there are so many varieties out there. But it's true for most fruit trees, they won't come true to type. So the only way we can reproduce that delicious Adams Pearmain, for example, is through vegetative propagation. And that's what grafting is. It's basically making clones. We take a mother tree. This one is the Adams Pearmain. This is our mother tree. We would take cuttings from it, and then you can see in the photos there on the left, there's a couple of ways to reproduce fruit trees. Kind of winter grafting, what people bench grafting is called, or whip and tongue, or you can do it in the summer. But you're taking a section of wood from the mother tree, from the Adams Pearmain, and you're cutting a few buds off. It's hard to do this with secateurs and a mic, but you're cutting a section off like that. You've got a few buds there. You make a cut like that one in the top left there. You make a corresponding cut on a rootstock that you've bought in and is either out of the ground or in the ground. And you make a slice and you stick the two together, bind them up. And then everything, you can see there, everything from that graft that grows above that graft forevermore will be Adams Pearmain. Everything that's below it will be the rootstock. And that's how you produce grafted trees. In the nursery, actually, we do budding, which is kind of the same thing, except rather than a section of wood like that, you cut out a single bud and you stick the bud in that rootstock when the rootstock's growing in the ground. So a couple of ways of doing it. That's what's on the right there. You can see just that tiny little bud stuck in the rootstock. From that, your tree will grow, potentially live for 100 years or more. So fruit trees are grafted. That's what makes them different. I've kind of mentioned it already. The rootstock is a really important component. Rootstocks are fruit trees as well. But rather than, and they've been bred and selectively bred and and they've been selectively bred, but rather than being bred for the fruit, the quality of their fruit, they've been bred and selected for the quality of their roots. And so general disease, like pest and disease resistance is the first thing, but the most important thing is they've been selected based on the amount of vigour that those roots will impart onto anything that's grafted onto it. And that's what rootstocks, that's the kind of primary function of grafting onto rootstocks. You can control the size of the tree. And you can get all sorts of different rootstocks for the different fruit trees. Each fruit tree will have a rootstock available that's kind of compatible that will impart different amounts of vigour. So if you only want small trees in your allotment, you can get a very dwarfing rootstock, kind of weak vigour. If you want to stick cows under your apple trees or your plum trees, whatever, you'll need a very vigorous rootstock to make sure there's enough vigour that tree can get up there and branches around the way. So you need to, if you're thinking about planting new trees, the first thing you need to think about is, well, what size do you want them? And the rootstock will dictate that, really, how you want to manage them. Yeah, and we were talking, I don't know, maybe you were in the chat this morning about the silver horticulture, you know, talking about the right rootstock for the right context, the right environment. If you've got market garden and you're thinking of planting trees, you know, agroforestry systems between beds, then actually more dwarfing rootstocks, what we call semi-vigorous, are probably more suitable. If you're thinking of sticking animals under there to graze, then obviously you need that vigour. So rootstocks are the main thing that control the overall size of the tree. The second way we control the size of the tree and the form of the tree is through pruning. Now pruning, we could spend all day long talking about pruning, we've only got a short period of time, so I'm just going to focus on formative pruning. Formative pruning is the pruning that you do to young trees, basically, in the first, say, 2-3 years. It's the formative pruning is all about establishing the shape and the form of the tree and establishing a really strong framework so that tree can go on and carry fruit successfully. Because by pruning, actually what you're doing is delaying fruiting, which seems at odds. If you're planting young fruit trees and you think, well, I want fruit as quickly as possible, why would I be pruning? If you don't prune them at all, what you tend to get, this is a kind of 2-year-old, this is a 2-year-old tree in a pot, but actually sometimes maidens, like 1-year-old trees, come out of the nursery looking like that. These could be, I mean they're not, but they could be the same age potentially. They look quite different, but that's just to do with the variety. There's a lot of difference in the way they grow according to the variety. But anyway, if you planted this out in your orchard and you left it alone completely, what would happen is you get a lot of fruit very quickly. You might get kind of 4 kilos of apples on each branch here, certainly at the tips of the Adams family, which is the partial tip out. So you think, well, that's a good thing, isn't it? But it's not, because this tree basically isn't ready to carry the fruit, and these branches are too weak. And what would happen is, well, the weight of the fruit would pull each branch down. In fact, the tree might end up at the end of the autumn, but just before you come and pick the fruit, all the branches are hanging down towards the ground. And the wood lignifies, so it becomes stronger in that downward facing position. So you pick all the fruit and the tree still looks like this kind of sad umbrella weeping down. It's no good at all. You want branches that are kind of growing up. There's no good having branches growing down towards the floor. You're not going to produce any decent fruit. So what we do with pruning, formative pruning, is the first few years, and it's not exact, but it's basically kind of year dot to say 4 years, at which point you kind of switch to a different type of pruning, but that's another day. And yeah, you're delaying the pruning and favouring kind of getting a really strong structure. So if you start with a tree like this, and lots of trees will start like this, kind of like what we call a maiden, an unfeathered maiden. Feathered maiden just means it's a bit like that. It's got branches. Feathers just mean branches. But quite often you'll get a maiden that looks something like that, a kind of stick basically. And the important thing with pruning to understand is that pruning is all about what you're doing is you're telling the tree you're trying to inform the tree how you want it to grow. You're trying to tell it where you want it to start branching. Because when you prune a branch, the tree's growth response to that is to throw out more branches, right? You prune a stem back like that, the tree's going to say, okay, well, I'm going to throw out a branch to replace that one going straight up, and then the 2 or 3 buds behind it are going to branch out as well. So pruning is a way to create bushiness, to create a kind of fullness. And that's what you want. You want you know, because the bushiness, the branches, that's the structure that's going to carry the fruit later on. Like I was saying with this one, if you did nothing, you just planted it out, there's a chance that you get a bit of fruit on the tip, and then by the end of the year, actually, the tree's kind of looking like that, and it's set like that. Not much good to anyone. So, wherever you prune, you're going to encourage the tree to start branching. That's the physics of pruning, essentially. And the main thing to bear in mind is that the further back you prune, the harder you prune your tree, the more growth response you're going to get. So if you just tip it like that at the top, little, like, you know, it doesn't really impart much. You might just get a few little 4 or 5 branches just coming out a little bit. You're not removing enough wood to tell that tree what you want. If you prune it all the way down here, say you want to establish some espaliers. You know, everyone familiar with espaliers? Like on a horizontal plane, you tie into a wire, 2 tiers coming out. Well, you would prune it really hard down here to get that strong growth, which you can then train. Quite often, you know, kind of middle ground, the middle way, is that you perhaps want a kind of metre clear stem, and then you want some branches to form. And so what you would do is you would prune just above that point. So that's in the ground, let's pretend that's in the ground. A metre's about there. So you find a bud, you prune to a bud, just above the metre, and you prune them off, like that. And what's going to happen as a response to that is you're going to get that top bud that you've pruned to is basically going to try and grow back and replace the bit that you've cut off. And it will probably, hopefully, if the tree's doing well, it will do that in the following summer, and it will kind of replace much of what you've cut out. Might grow a couple of feet, something like that. And you'll also get these 2 or 3 buds behind that, or lower than that top one. They'll start pushing out as well. You'll start to get the beginnings of your branching. And that's all there is to pruning, really. Simple. So you prune to encourage branching, and the harder you prune your branch, the more growth response you're going to get. If you think about the hedges that the farmers flail to death every year, they cut it back to nothing, and in 1 year the thing it's back where it started, isn't it? And then they come back, cut it again, come back. But it's essentially the same thing. That's, you know, you're pruning really hard and you're getting growth response. It's basically coppicing and pollarding. It's the same principle. So that's how you kind of deal with a tree that looks like that. A maiden, like that. If you've got a feathered maiden, it looks something more like this. And also, once you've cut that at the end of in the winter, and you come back 12 months later, this one should also look a bit more like that. We'll have branches coming out near the top. I forgot to say, when you do this, the reason I've taken all the leaves off these trees is because we're pretending we're in winter. It's kind of cold enough to feel like we're in winter, isn't it? So we're pretending it's winter, and it's January, February time. We start lifting the trees at nursery kind of late November, December, once they start going dormant. We'll send them out through December, January, February. If you've got fruit trees that don't have stone in the fruit, so apples, pears, quince, medlar, any others? That covers most of them. They can all be pruned in the winter when they've got no leaf on. Anything where the fruit has a stone in the middle, so plums, cherries, gauges, damsons, nectarines, peaches, they all need to be pruned when the trees are in leaf, basically. And the earlier part of the year when they're in leaf is better. It's not worth pruning anything with a stone in it in the winter because they're very susceptible to disease. But apples, pears, quince, medlar, anything without a stone, this is when you're doing your formative pruning in January, February. So you've got a 2-year-old tree, or you've done your first year's pruning on your maiden whip, and this is what you've got in the second year. And the trick in the second year, in the third year, is firstly to be able to identify what's a good branch and what's a bad branch. Good branch and a bad branch. And a good branch is one that's basically close to a 90-degree angle to the stem. Okay, so these ones are close to that one, is basically bang on 90 degrees. And the reason that that's a good branch is because that 90-degree angle, that close to 90-degree angle, is a really strong branch. This is a good strong crotch angle, is what we call it. And it's strong enough to carry the weight of fruit on it. In fact, in a few years' time, if that was 4 or 5 years older, you could climb up this tree, putting your feet on these bits, and you'd be absolutely fine. So those are good branch angles. Branches that are growing kind of close to the horizontal. The horizontal plane is the fruitful plane. Okay? gets the most amount of light. The hormones in the tree are actually telling those horizontal branches to produce more fruit bud than growth bud. So we're looking for these really nice wide-angled branches close to 90 degrees. They're the ones you identify before you get your secateurs out. You identify the strong ones. You think, okay, these ones I'm going to keep, or we're going to deal with later. And what you want to look for next are the weak ones. So it's the opposite of these strong ones. It's any branch that's got a very acute angle like that. You see these ones? It's kind of hard to see, but you can see that angle there, or that angle there. The worst offender is at the back. You see this one here? So that is a terrible angle for a tree. Or not for a tree, but it's a terrible angle for a future cropping branch, we say. And it's the same with any tree out there. If you've got an oak tree out there that's doing that, it's the same principle. Once these branches get really big and heavy, that's a very weak union there. And the chances are that once it's fruiting, it will do that. It will tear. It will break and it will tear and it will have a big horrible wound. So you identify these weak branches. I don't recommend you do what I just did there. You identify these weak branches, and those are the first ones that you get rid of, because you definitely don't want those, because they are, even if they're kind of, you think, oh, it's growing in the right place, in the right direction, but if it's very acute like that, it's inherently weak, and there's no point in having it. It'll never be good. So you prune those ones off. Okay, prune that one off. There's a terrible one there, we're going to prune that one off. And this is pruning right back to the stem. There's a potentially bad one there, we might come back to that. Okay, so those are this one is questionable, but we're going to ignore that one for now. But what I've been left with are these better branch angles. That's about borderline. What's that? 90 degrees? Is that 45 degrees? When it's anything less than 45 degrees is not worth keeping, but 45 to 90 is what you want. So you got rid of the very worst offenders, those very kind of acute branch angles that you know are going to be weak and they just won't carry the fruit. The weight of the fruit will make that branch break. The next thing to think about is the stuff that's going on down here. Well, if there's so much fluff and side branching down low where you want to put your rabbit guard, you can't get the rabbit guard on, well then obviously they've got to come off as well because they're in the way. And a branch down here, got to remember, some people kind of get confused by this. A branch down there is always going to be down there. The tree doesn't grow from the bottom up, it grows from the tips out. So that branch, if you tied a ribbon around that branch, those two, and came back in 100 years, the ribbon would still be there. There'd just be this big branch out here somewhere. So a branch in the wrong place is a branch always in the wrong place. And I would suggest that if you're growing freestanding trees, a tree out on its own, a few metres around it, I would suggest that anything under kind of 70 centimetres is probably too low. Or 50 centimetres, say, is too low. So if this was mine, I would be pruning these off as well. They're always going to be shaded out by the branches above it, and the sun is what we're doing with it. Cropping fruit, we're cropping sunlight basically. So these are too low, so I'm going to happily just prune those ones off. Now I can get my rabbit guard around it so everything's happy. Nice and protected from the rabbits and the voles. And then what we're doing then is what we did on the previous one. We're shortening leaders so that we get branching out. And a good rule of thumb is half of the previous year's growth. So in this case, this is all 1 year growth. So I'm just pruning to a downward facing bud. So there's one there. That means that when that bud starts pushing out, hopefully the branch is going to go out that way. If you prune to an upward facing bud, like that, there's a much higher chance that bud's just going to go straight up. We don't want branches going straight up, we want branches going out. So an outward facing bud like that. And it's quite simple. You go around and you reduce everything back by about half. Don't have to get the ruler out. It can be fairly approximate. Around there somewhere. I'm going to get rid of that one for now. And there, and there, and there. If you've got little stuff that's kind of less than 10 centimetres, or 10 centimetres thereabouts, I'm not too worried about it. I would just pretend it's not there. Ignore it. Don't get too het up about it. But these bigger branches, you see, there's that kind of, it's a bit more balanced now, isn't it? If we ignore that top bit, there's a bit more. It looks stronger already. And so we're delaying fruiting because what we're telling those branches to do by cutting those leaders back, you're going to get the top bud that we cut back out to is going to replace the bit we cut off, and then just behind it we're going to get these branches growing out. So the whole thing's going to become bushier, right? Also what happens is right back down here it tends to produce fruit buds. So you will get some fruit happening closer to the stem, but you won't get too much. You won't get so much that the whole tree is hanging over like that. the next thing you'd do with this tree is nearly there. Is you decide, well, what form do you want? Do you want your tree to be really tall? In which case, you want another tier of branches like this up here. In which case, you choose a bud about where you want the branches to form, a bit above it, and you prune back, a bit like we did on that one. Just do the same thing. Prune back, and then you're going to get some branches coming out here. That's if you want a tree that's much taller, or your tree that's got established. It's what we call a centre leader tree. This is the leader, and the centre leader comes all the way up, and you carry it on. A bit like how a birch tree grows, like one stem, one main stem. So that will carry on. Or if you think, okay, well, I don't want to be climbing any ladders or anything like that. Don't want to be picking fruit that's out of reach. In which case, you would kind of terminate the height of the tree by something like that. And then, this point is the kind of top of the main stem now, and then these branches are going to grow out. But hopefully, you can kind of keep them in picking range. So that's how you keep your tree. This is what we call an open-centered tree or a goblet-shaped tree, and the sunlight kind of gets into the middle, in theory. So yeah, that's how you kind of stop your tree from getting any higher. Then you're just managing these leaders as they grow out, and you're kind of keeping them reduced. And that's formative pruning. And so you're doing that for the first couple of years. You can imagine that if you keep doing this too long, the tree's actually going to get thicker and bushier and bushier and bushier. And within, by year 6, if you carried on doing this, actually you're going to just have like a kind of hedge, like a thicket, with no light getting inside at all. And the opposite of what we're trying to do. So this is why formative pruning is what you do in the first couple of years. First, I'd say up to year 3, to the point where you're starting to produce apples, and then the pruning stops, it flips, and it turns into renewal pruning and maintenance pruning, but that's next year. Okay, so this is formative pruning. You don't want to be doing this on old trees necessarily, but this is what you do with young trees. Maiden whips like that, 2-year-old trees, 3-year-old trees like this, or feathered maidens. And that's your whistle-stop tour of formative pruning. Oh, got password. Anyone know Sophia's password?
2050.
2050. Okay.
Don't share that.
No, don't share that. Straight to the cash point. Right. So, what's formative pruning? We've done that. Why, when, how? I think we've covered all of those things. Does anyone have any questions about pruning? I mean, we can do questions at the end, but questions about what I've done so far?
Buy the tree from the nursery, plant it in the ground,
Yeah.
you do it then.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I wasn't very clear. Yeah, exactly. So apples, pears, quince, medlar, nut trees, anything where the fruit doesn't have a stone in it, right? Prunus. Prunus, wait until the things come into leaf. So normally if it's May, if you forget, then June. If you live further north, it might be June. At that point, that's when you start doing those prunus species, genus. If you, apple trees, pear trees, nut trees, yeah, you do it once you've got it from the nursery, January, February, or December if you want. December, January, February, March. If you forget, and it's like April, May, you can still do it. Apple trees, pear trees, very resilient. You can basically prune them any time of the year. You're not going to kill it. But what you're going to do is by pruning it in the winter, is you get the most vigorous growth response. So winter pruning encourages the most vigorous growth. And pruning in the summer, like early September, end of August, actually you get the least amount of vigorous growth response. So that's also a useful trick, but it's kind of for another chat. Yeah. Do you want to?
When you're pruning in May or June,
Yeah.
you're still going to have that growth response.
Oh yeah. Right. Yeah. So the question is, if you kind of prune like this on prunus species, nectarines, peaches, plums, whatever, are you going to get the vigorous growth response? Yes, you are. Grow too well. But yeah, pruning if you prune it hard like this back in early June, your plum tree or whatever, you're still going to get growth out here if it's been planted well and it's established well. Yeah, go on.
Is there any difference in when you're pruning depending on the vigor of the tree? Or how much you're pruning?
Well, not. I mean, this is the thing with pruning. We could do a lot of chat about pruning, but I mean, the harder if a tree's not growing very well, or doesn't seem to be growing very strongly, if you prune it harder rather than less hard, you should encourage it to grow more strongly. It should encourage a growth response. So if you've got a tree that really hasn't done very much at all, and you're happy to delay the fruiting a bit, you can kind of, you can go right in here. I mean, you could prune it right back in there, and you're going to get much stronger. That's going to encourage strong growth. But what I would say is, if a tree's not really growing very well at all, You've got to ask why, and it might be something else is going on. It might be it's dying down the bottom, or whatever, you know. Yep. With who trees? Oh yeah, nut trees. Yeah, essentially yes. This is open-centered tree, open-centered shape. Yeah. In the same time of year. Yeah. And the same principle. If you've got a single stem like that, and you want it to branch out, then you need to cut that stem back to at the point where you want the branches. Like cob nuts, it's normally traditionally it's about 2 foot, 50 60 centimeters, something like that. And you get that kind of short stem and then that open center. But it might be like walnuts or something. You want the taller stem. I kind of forgot to say that. Like if you're grazing and your tree, you say that's come through the post, you bought that, and you were imagining putting your alpacas under it or something, then obviously it's not tall enough. So you've got to wait before you start pruning and let that tree get higher, and then at some point, maybe 2 years down the line, you start. Either it's going to start making its own branches happily and you can just let it do its thing, or you have to encourage the branching by pruning it back. I'm going to carry on because otherwise we won't get through, and then we'll come back to. No, go for it, Adam. What's your question?
Well, when you're leaving the trees to cultivators in the summer, they're getting fruit.
Yeah.
Growing in the summer and it's young.
Yeah.
But it seems to be having very upright growth.
Yeah.
But you don't want that. You want
Yeah.
chips like.
Yeah. You want white. Yeah.
What do you think about fish tuning?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. So Adam's saying, what happens often is, this is like me telling you, trees don't actually do what you want them to do all the time. They kind of, you can kind of coax them and encourage them, try and get them in the right direction. But they often come back and do something you don't really want. Often what you do what you get from all this pruning, especially if you prune very hard, is you get quite vertical growth, and it can be not what you want. If you've got not that many trees, for example, and to encourage this horizontal branching, you can weigh branches down. Because, like I said, the more horizontal the branch, the more fruitful it is. So if you've got very vertical branches, and no matter how much you prune, you can't get any branches to come out at a nice angle, you can pull these branches down, you can tie them, a bit of baler twine or something, tie it to a cane in the ground, and just keep it there. From the beginning of the year to the end of the year, you have to remember to come back and untie it, otherwise it will girdle the tree. But if you do that for one growing season, when you come back, you untie it and the branch will be in the same position. It looks a bit ridiculous, but it looks a bit kind of funny in your orchard. You've got all these strings everywhere, and it's time consuming. It takes time, but I do it in my orchard, but I'm an obsessive fruit geek. So but you might want to do it to encourage that form if you can't get it to do what it wants to do. If you can't get it to do what you're trying to get it to do without pulling branches down and tying them down, or putting weights on them. I've never tried with the weights thing. It seems easier to me to just tie it to the floor, the branch. Is that all right? Okay, so we'll go quickly through growing organic fruit. So a few things to consider really. Like I say, this might be that your context is you've got a market garden, you're thinking of growing some fruit to supplement your boxes, or to put in a shop, or maybe you're thinking of setting up a fruit farm, organic fruit farm. Or maybe it's just for yourself, for your kitchen, or whatever. Most of the principles for growing organic fruit are the same as conventional fruits. Spraying regimes aside. Resilience and diversity. One of the great things about growing fruit trees in a market garden, a bit like we've seen here, probably today or yesterday in Tolly's Agroforestry rows, is that you've got all the diversity of crops, and you've got brassicas that are you overwinter and start going. Purple sprout and broccoli starts going to seed, starts going to flower in the spring. You've got kind of sweet corn trash that's sitting there overwintering. You've got all these places for beneficial insects and predatory insects to live, and they are your friends when it comes to fruit trees, because one of the biggest things is aphids in the spring. So having all these habitats and having mixed, broad variety of species and types of and crops and tussocky areas and beetlebanks, all the rest of it, it's the best environment to grow fruit trees, rather than a kind of commercial orchard where everything is just a single variety of tree, herbicide strip, bit of grass in between. It's kind of like the opposite of what you want. And so resilience and diversity in terms of your, where you're growing, but also resilience in diversity when it comes to the varieties that you're growing and the types of fruit that you're growing. Particularly, at the moment we're going into this kind of really we're in this erratic weather pattern, and we don't know you know, what the spring will bring, you know, what the summer will bring, or the autumn, whatever. So having as many different crops as possible, you know, within reason. I mean, bearing in mind that tree crops are essentially like you're growing one thing. It's one crop. You have plums, apricots, apples. You treat them slightly differently. Essentially one thing. So you know, having lots of different varieties, lots of different types is good. It means that on some years you're going to get lots of one thing, and then on you know, it's obvious. So I would promote, you know, also regional varieties. Regional varieties have been grown in your area for a long time because they work. They tend to work, so it's kind of obvious again. So look out for regional, search for regional varieties. They're not always the best. Like just because you live in Cornwall doesn't mean that all the Cornish ones are good, unfortunately. But you can balance that with traditional varieties, the ones like Ashmead's Kernel, Pitmustard Pineapple, Ribston Pippin. Apples, those are all apples, whatever. But it's the same for all varieties. You know, the ones that have been grown for a long time tend to be the most resilient, and so often easier to grow in a kind of organic system where you're not spraying stuff. The more modern varieties, particularly the new ones that people bring on and plant breeders' rights and stuff, you know, they've got pink flesh, or they've got, I don't know, they taste like sherbet or something, you know, they're not always very easy to grow in a kind of non-conventional system. So bear that in mind. I think it's Stephen Briggs, who's in it's a Whitehall farm, and he had some data on his yields, and over several years he had a mixture of more modern varieties and some more traditional varieties, and over several years the traditional varieties, the Adams pear main and all the rest of it, were higher yielding on average. So yeah, so that's varieties. Harvest and storage, again, if you're growing lots of different types, when things are ready is a key consideration. You know, cherries, you've got like cherries, plums, you've got apricots, nectarines, peaches. You've got to pick that stuff and kind of sell it, get rid of it quickly. Like it's not gonna, you can't really store it for very long. So you possibly don't want acres and acres of apricots unless you want to either make apricot jam for a living, or you've got a good outlet for them. And similarly, apples, you know, the early season apples, they don't store for more than a few days, maybe a couple of weeks at best. And so, you know, if you've got a market garden, you think about what varieties to put in, just be a bit careful about not overloading your kind of, you know, not having too many plums and suddenly finding that you can't get rid, you know, they're rotting before you can get rid of them. Or you're planting August apple and pear varieties that last like a couple of days off the tree. It's not really any good to you. One way around it, certainly with apples and pears, is growing cordons. Cordons is a really good way of growing lots of different trees really close together. You basically plant them a metre apart, and you keep them pruned like that really hard through the summer. Well, not through the summer. Once at the end of the summer, you prune back all the new growth. Really easy to prune, and you get much less fruit. You maybe get 10 kilos of fruit or something, but you're getting lots of lights of fruit, really good quality. And it means actually, if you've got like 2 or 3 of these George Caves, you might get 20 kilos of those that go in a box scheme, and you know, they're perfect for a few days, for a week. You don't want more than that, perhaps. If you're going to design your system, you want to think more about having the mid-season and the late-season varieties, things you can pick in October, and then you can put maybe in your fridge, in your cold store, if you've got a cold store, or just like, you know, somewhere cool, out of the light, or somewhere rodent-proof, and you know, you can be selling those apples, eating those apples, whatever, and pears, right into January, February. Ashmead's Kernel will take you through till March, and it's still a nice thing to eat, you know. It's not like a horrible mushy thing. It's still. These old varieties were bred in a time when we didn't have the commercial refrigeration, so they served a purpose then, and they're still good now. So getting advice on varieties is really, you know, I mean, I'm sure all of you would do that anyway. But go to local tree nurseries like we're in Devon. There's Tom Adams in the Midlands. There's different ones dotted around, and we can recommend good varieties for you. It will work. Irrigation and mulch. It's kind of imperative that you have the ability to irrigate your young trees. You know, the last few, since I took on the nursery 2018, every year we've had to irrigate stuff. You know, the young trees in the nursery, because we go through weeks where we just don't get enough rain. Even this year, it just felt kind of like, you know, not hardly kind of balmy, but the ground was cracking in early July. You know, there wasn't enough water around. So if you planted 100 trees, 100 maidens, it's cost you, whatever, 18, 20 quid a tree. Or you want to make sure that you've got a way of getting 10 litres of water to each one. At least if we go into a drought phase. It might be that, you know, if you're getting 50 mil of rain a month on average, then that's fine, don't need to worry. But if we go into kind of 6-8 weeks of no rain, you want to be getting like 10 litres around each tree once a week at least, to keep it going, keep it thriving. I certainly wouldn't be spending hundreds and hundreds of pounds setting up an orchard if you had no way of irrigating. It's a bit risky. Mulching is one way to kind of, balance that out. Mulching does two things. Firstly, it retains soil moisture, so stops the ground drying out when we do go into those dry periods. Perfect for that. Keeps the soil nice and moist when it does rain. But more importantly, or just as importantly, it stops the grass growing. So if you're growing an orchard conventionally, you would be out there with your sprayer, herbicide, spraying off around, and the tree wouldn't have any competition around the base. We're obviously not doing that. We're not into that. So we need to stop that grass growing. The grass is the biggest bully for water and nutrients. The roots are the roots of the tree are lower than the grass roots. So when it does rain, the grass is taking up the water. It's not getting down to the trees. So mulching is the best thing you could do after you plant your trees, and basically do it straight away. I would get some mulch around your tree. Ideally, rainmeal, wood chip, willow is basically, the kind of the best thing if you can get it. It also has other properties that are good for the tree. Salicylic acid, which stimulates the tree's kind of immune response. So there's recent studies to show that it's has a significant benefit to the tree. Mulching with particularly goat willow, things like that. There's a few different, they've done lots of trials on not lots of trials, they've done trials on lots of different types of willow, and some are better than others. It's worth looking into. Probably it's in Ben and Andy's book. But goat willow is one. So get rainmeal wood chips around them, at least like half a square metre, something like that, but ideally a nice big square metre pile. Much better than these mulch mats, which I don't recommend actually, like the woven, you can get jute ones and woolen ones. They're basically like lovely hotels for voles. And the voles sit under there, it's nice and warm, no one can see them, and then they eat your roots of the tree. 10 minutes. Okay, we better get quick. So, irrigation and mulch. Mulch is really, really important, and I would say if you're planting any number of trees, make sure you've got a nice big pile of mulch there that can go around to stop the grass growing for the first year at least. Ideally you do it for the first couple of years, and irrigate if you need to. Grade outs and adding value. Growing organic fruit is bloody hard in terms of producing, fruit that people would be happy to eat. Probably fruit that we'd all be happy to eat here, no problem, but fruit that the folks out there want to eat, it's very tricky. You could be looking at 50%, something like that, grade out, and 50% that make it through. Oh, that was time suddenly. It's a good skill. You've just given me 10 more minutes of my life. Right, so that's trying me. What was I saying? Oh, grade outs. Yeah. So if you want to be producing like fruit for customers to eat, it's bloody hard work. There's going to be a lot of stuff that's not making it through. So you're going to have to do something with it. If it's stone fruit, what you're talking about, jams and conserves and things like that. Apples, pears. Well, obviously you're looking at juice and cider, really, and also conserves, I guess, jams. But juice and cider are the obvious ones. Juice and cider is quite an easy, it's quite a good thing to do. For about 100 kilos of fruit, you've got 100 kilos of apples that you've graded out, can't put in a veg box, but you can juice them and you'll get about 65, 70 litres of juice. And if you put that in a bottle, I don't know what you're getting, about 100 bottles, and you might make about £1 on each one, after you've paid yourself to pick the apples and press them and all that, about £1 profit. You sell it for a few quid, 350 or something. So, it's not insignificant. If you can do a few hundred bottles, it all helps. So it's worth thinking about what you're going to do with all that fruit. You can get grants for planting fruit trees now through various avenues. Actually, I can tell you what they are later if you want. But do bear in mind, you get a half-standard tree, like a bush tree or apple tree on 106. After like 5-6 years, you're going to get like 30, 40 kilos off each tree. It's got a lot of fruit to deal with. If you've got 100 trees doing that, it's a lot of juice. So just be aware of think about what you're going to do with all this stuff. If you've got tunnels, this is something I'm new to this. I've been wanting to put a tunnel up at work for years. I finally did it last year, and I planted a couple of nectarines and peaches in there. This tunnel is like a play. It's I'm just messing about. I've got a few tomatoes and aubergines in there for us and for other people that work at the nursery. It's not a commercial tunnel, but I'm just interested to see how the nectarines and peaches do, and they're doing amazingly well. I planted a tree, 4 trees that look like that in April, I think, March, April, quite late. And that was probably in about May, and now they're double that. You know, they're huge. And I had fruit off them this year. The best peaches and nectarines I've ever eaten in my life. Amazing. So, you know, it's definitely a commercially viable thing if you've got tunnels that you're cropping salad and whatever else you're putting in there. Either down the middle, like some people do, or you know, you could do it like we've done it. It takes up a bit more space. We've done kind of 4 meters apart. You kind of want to keep that single plane, you know, grow them like a fan. Again, you need posts and wires and things. So it's a bit involved, and there's quite a lot of pruning because when they're in the tunnel, they'll grow a lot. But there's a chap, Nathan, I can't remember the name of the farm in Wales, but I think he is in Ben and Andy's book, and he does this as part of his, you know, commercial production of fruit for his veg boxes, for his market. Cherries also, you can grow cherries out. Oh yeah, I will just say about peaches, nectarines, apricot. I wouldn't advise growing them outside, basically in our climate. And I know that you know, we're getting warmer climate, we're getting warmer summers at times, but we're also very, very wet, and they don't like the wet. They don't like the wet winters. And unless you're in like Kent or Surrey, maybe Essex, you know, certainly if you're in the West Country and Wales, like just forget it. Don't do them outside. You'll only be disappointed. Put them in your tunnels. They get a really horrible fungal disease called peach leaf curl, and it's just crap. There's not much you can do about it, so they're not healthy, unfortunately. So yeah, you could do it against west-facing wall, south-facing wall, but again, you have to cover them like something in the winter. When you see these old Victorian gardens, I don't know where these ones have got it, you know, where they were growing peaches and nectarines and stuff on the walls, you'll see above they had this framework, and they would put, you know, glass probably, a glass box over the trees, or at least some kind of tiles to keep the water off the trees in the winter. So challenging to grow it outside, but definitely think about it if you've got space in a tunnel. The other problem, friends of ours who have done this, they did have a bit of an issue with red spider mite. The trees, a nice place for red spider mite to overwinter, and then in the next spring they can go and munch all your tomatoes and cucumbers. So that was a bit of a disaster, small disaster. But you can get biological control for that. As I say, I'm new to I'm messing around with this, so I'll have to report back to you in a couple of years when all my tomatoes are dead and I say, actually, don't bother with this. No. Peaches, you can get, and tomatoes from someone else, you can't get peaches. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. These are on St. Julian A, which is probably a little too vigorous. But you can go Pixie, I guess, or VVA is a new rootstock. But you know, plenty of people have been doing this on St. Julian A, and it's just you have to keep on top of the pruning and the training. But yeah, these are on like half standard. Peaches and nectarines are very vigorous; they put on a lot of growth. And cherries, so you can do cherries outside, but you have to net them. And you can do a commercial crop of cherries, no problem. But you definitely want them on a very wheat-growing rootstock, like a low-vigor rootstock. Gisela 5 is the one. But if you do them in a tunnel, oh, amazing! Such beautiful quality cherries you get. You do have to net them. So you have to net them to stop the birds, but you get a few cherries in that tunnel, they're incredible. Again, really high value. So we'll fly through pests and diseases. The most common things we're getting in this, in our climate are fungal diseases. There's not really anything you can do about fungal diseases as an organic grower, apart from choose the right varieties in the first place. So choose varieties that have natural levels of good disease resistance against fungal diseases. And then prune it out when you see it. So with young trees, if you get a bit of canker on young branches, then prune it out. If you're getting a tree that's like just falling apart with canker, then just get rid of it, pull it out, grow another variety. If you've got canker in the main stem, a bit like the one on the left there, you can pare it out with a knife. Sometimes you get canker at this point between the branch and the main stem where water gets in and water is sitting there and fungal diseases start in this kind of crotch. Well, you can prune that out and you can pare it out with a knife in the winter. It looks fairly brutal, but I've done that on trees and that have then they recover and they don't get canker again. So that's one way of managing it. But inevitably in the West Country, this is our main challenge. One of the reasons it's hard to grow organic fruit. In the olden days, they would spray copper. We're not allowed to do that. Scab is another one. Scab, you probably are familiar with scab. You see it on the fruit, black kind of lesions, and it goes through into the fruit. So certainly unsaleable. But if it's not too bad, you can certainly do juice and cider with that. You see it on the leaf there. One way around, scab, one kind of, how do you break the cycle is by picking up these scabby apples, composting them or whatever, taking them off site, and mowing under your trees in the winter, because those leaves that are all scabby and they fall to the ground, that is a vector the following year when the rain comes in the spring and they release the spores back and they reinfect the tree. So either go picking up the leaves, but I don't recommend that, but mulch, like flailing them so they chop them up and they rot down quickly, or with a mower that picks up the leaf, picks up the grass and bag it and stick it in the compost. Break that cycle of reinfection, taking the leaves away. Also, if you stay on the wood and pruning it out, as I say. Brown rot is another one. Same thing. Basically, if you see it, prune it off, get it away from the tree off-site. You get that with plums, you get it with apples. And then normally, it's an infection that starts when if something's eaten, like nibbled the fruit. Even a wasp has started eating the plums or eating the apples, and it's an open wound. The brown rot gets in. It's a pain in the arse because you could be looking at a beautiful crop in kind of July, and then when you come back in September, it looks like the stuff on the right. Take it away out of sight, not out of sight, off site. That's what I meant. Bacterial canker. This is that. It's not a very good photo, but can you see on the right? This is what you get from stone fruit. One of the risks of pruning your stone fruit in the winter is you get bacterial canker. And that oozing is a kind of classic sign that your tree's got it. It's not necessarily fatal, but it's not great. You also get this dieback of branches. You get a few little branches you get a few little leaves on the end of the branch, and the rest of the branch is completely bare. Probably bacterial canker. There's a certain period that the tree will kind of live with it, put up with it, and grow through it. Normally, at some point, it gives up. But it's a challenge of particularly growing plums, stone fruit in the West Country where it's very damp. They don't actually like it growing. They like growing in the southeast, and northeast, or in Midlands, in the east. Where you've got less rainfall, they'll do much better. Aphids, I've kind of already mentioned those. You're getting this curling leaf in the spring or in like May, June. If you open them up, you'll see all these aphids underneath, and we're all familiar with aphids. Best thing is, you can either kind of squish them. If there's too many, you can wash them off, spray them off with a hose or with a little sprayer, a bit of soapy liquid, kind of suffocates them. Or at the nursery, we're growing thousands of trees, and we don't have really a problem with aphids. And what we do have is a huge kind of reserve of ladybirds, and they just plough through any kind of. They find the aphids when they arrive, and they just tend to plough through them. So, again, in a market garden situation, kind of mixed, diverse cropping setup, then you've got a better chance of having the right predatory insects around to help you out with these kind of things. So a little bit, couple of minutes on the last slide or so. Climate challenges. I mean, there's basically, it's the long and the short of it. It's not easy growing this, growing organic fruit in our current. I don't think it ever was easy, but certainly the way the weather is now, it makes it very hard. Trees are dying because they spend the winter. They get root death because they're spending winter just in saturated ground, and they don't like that at all. You're getting, it's not getting cold enough in the winter, so some trees which require like 1,000 hours of chill hours between like 3 degrees and 7 degrees in the south of England, it's just not happening. So then you get trees like flowering really erratically and behaving weirdly. Obviously, like a couple of years, was it 2022, we had that intense summer and trees were just like giving up in August. It's too hot, Certainly the old varieties, I talked earlier about old varieties being resilient. Anything with cocks in it, that 2022 year, was just looking so crap in August. Cocks, and there's loads of varieties with cocks in it. But they obviously can't handle, they were bred in kind of Victorian times when maybe we just weren't getting, 40 degrees summers or whatever. So, again, it kind of points to just growing a broad range of varieties, broad range of fruit types, and hoping that some of them kind of come through. Some reasons to be cheerful, part 3. And things to consider. So diversity of varieties, I've kind of banged on about that. Traditional, regional, older varieties, resilience. There are new opportunities for changing climate. Yeah, I still wouldn't invest in like an apricot farm outside quite yet. But we're not. The problem is we're getting. We might get these very warm periods in the summer, but we're also getting these insanely wet periods in the winter, or we might get the warm period in the summer followed by a wet period in the summer. So it's just it's hard, but I think obviously well, don't bet the farm on it, but it's worth experimenting. So that's the key. It's worth experimenting, thinking in your head, you know, we're growing the best white wine in the world now in the south of England, so who would have thought that 30 years ago? So the climate, you know, is having an effect on what we can grow. Promising developments in disease resistance. Yeah, maybe we've skipped that. And organic methods increasing biodiversity and resilience. I think I've gone through that enough. So yeah, the more broad range of tree types, the better, I think. Does anyone have any questions? Got a few minutes of questions. Hi. They came up. Yeah. Any ideas? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Actually, this year wasn't. We were just talking about aphids as a problem, but this year we didn't. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't see that many aphids. I know I talked about our ladybird reserves, but I didn't even see the beginnings of them. And I think that they didn't like that cold, wet that we had. It just went on and on through, you know, March, April, cold. It was, yeah. So you know, there's things are different every year, aren't they? And so pests are the same. Some years you get certain things. Well, Devon. We're in Devon, yeah. 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 So with the warming climate, should we be kind of the varieties moving off? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And certainly, like, you know, things. You know, those varieties that were bred traditionally and grown traditionally in the south of England that are used to kind of longer summers. Yeah, I mean, there's probably can start moving up. I don't know what 50 miles or something. I'm not sure what it is, but the range is. But yeah, those you could probably grow. You know, certainly grow decent peaches and nectarines in, I don't know, somewhere in the Midlands in the tunnel, definitely, and certainly and you know, higher, further north. I'm sure as the summer, as we get these warmer summers.
See peaches there.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, is that in Devon? No. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, well they've been flowering in the autumn. Yeah, yeah. So you say you got apple trees and they're flowering now. Yeah, basically take that fruit bud off. So fruit bud, yeah, fruit flower off. So this is the kind of some varieties do it anyway. Like Dabinet is a classic one. It will start flowering in November. You know, completely weird. But some old varieties do it. But as a result of this lack of winter chill, some varieties need like 1,800 hours of between 3 and 7 degrees when they're dormant. So from like December through to March, 1,800 hours is a lot of hours. Not when it, you know, if it goes below 3 degrees, it doesn't count. If it goes, so you know, they're very needy, and we're not getting those cold winters. So as a result of not getting the winter chill that the varieties require, you're getting erratic flowering. You know, a couple of years ago I went to Thatcher's orchards, and they had orchards of Dabinet, and it was in May. Half the tree, I can't remember, the tree at the bottom, half the tree was in leaf and in flower, and the top half of the tree had nothing on it at all. It was like two different trees. It's precisely that. You know, it was colder down here, but up here it was warmer. It just wasn't getting the winter chill requirements. And so, the kind of erratic behaviour of, you know, like flowering at the wrong time, or not flowering at all, coming into the leaf, you know, that's what you were faced with.
I think it would just drop it on its own.
No, sorry. So what to do about it? You want to pick it off, because if the tree at this time of year is putting its energy into producing flowers, you're basically robbing the tree of the energy it should be putting into, you know, conserving before it goes into dormancy, so that in the spring it comes into like strong growth. So I would, if it's feasible, I would take those flowers off if your tree's in flower at this time in the wrong month like that. Yeah, definitely. Okay.
What's your opinion on notching?
Yeah, notching. I mean, yeah. So notching is basically, you know, if we've got a tree like this, and we definitely, you know, we want a branch to grow out at a particular point. Perhaps we're trying to train an espalier or something. We want one branch that way, one branch that way. We can notch the tree. That's basically putting a little cut just above the bud that we want to push out. And you basically, I can't really do it with a microphone now, but anyway, you basically do it. Oh, there you go. Oh, mic stand. You put a little notch like that. Be able to see it. You just basically take the bark off. There you go. See that one? You can see a little lime green. You basically do a little cut into the cambium just above the bud when it's dormant, and the kind of science is that the tree is photosynthesizing, and the sugars are going down. They kind of no, it's the other way around. The tree is the kind of sap is flowing up from the roots, and it kind of gets to this point where you've got a notch, and a lot of the tree's sap energy goes into that bud rather than carrying on up, and it can work. Yeah, have you done it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and have you found it works?
Yeah, and what about this? We did some like where we went underneath the buds we didn't want as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it does the inverse. If you do it above, that encourages the sap to the bud, and then it kind of pushes out that bud. If you do it underneath, you're kind of reducing the amount of kind of energy, for want of a better word, that goes to the bud from the sap flow, and you're getting weaker growth. So if you, yeah, that's basically notching and nicking. I can't remember what the other one's called. Notching and maybe it's just notching or notching up and down. I don't know. But basically, yeah, it can. You do it in the winter when the tree's dormant, and it can encourage that bud to push out, or push out more vigorously, or push out less vigorously. It's something to do if you are really keen on getting that bud to go that way. If you're not, then I wouldn't bother. Okay, a couple more, and then we'll yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Keep it mulched. So how long should you keep the young trees mulched for away from grass? I would say for ideally I'd say 3 years. Until that tree, it's the same period that you're doing that renewal pruning, you know, you're reducing this tree back, trying to get the framework established. You can keep that mulch topped up, keep that grass down, certainly in the first year if nothing else. But your tree will do probably 60% better if it's not growing in grass, maybe more, 80% better. If you've mulched out around the tree, you'll get lots of growth. You should be getting, 60, 70 centimetres of growth from it, from after you've planted it, if you prune it back like I showed you, if it's been mulched. If you don't, if you plant it out to a grassy field and walk away, and you might just get 5 centimetres of growth, So it's really important. Definitely mulch in the first year. If you've got the material and you've got the time and energy, then keep it up for a couple of years. After that, you can, certainly on semi-vigorous and vigorous rootstocks, you can let that grass grow up to the stem. And that actually is quite a good idea once it starts cropping, because it keeps the tree kind of more balanced in terms of growth and fruit production. Yeah. Hi?
Do you encourage people to pick the young fruit off from the trees in the first few years?
Yeah, if you're doing the formative pruning that I kind of showed you, you're probably still going to get maybe a couple of apples on it, or a couple of pears or plums or whatever. And if it is literally just a few, I would say leave them. If it's absolutely covered in fruit, then I would thin it right out in the first couple of years, because the danger is, or the risk is, you're going to get that the weight of the fruit is going to pull that thing over. So you have to make an assessment, whether it's too much or whether it's not. And I guess if you've done the formative pruning, you've reduced the side branches back so they're a bit stiffer and more and stronger, then they can carry a couple of fruit. So there's kind of mixed opinions on it. Some people say, "Oh, get it fruiting quickly," because then it tells that's what the tree's supposed to do. And the psychology of the tree, I don't know whether the tree has psychological experiences. Probably does. But yeah, get that fruit, get the tree fruiting early, and just keep going. But you don't want it to be. Yeah, I would thin them if you've got a lot. Things like plums can really overdo it, like young Victoria plums, where they're just covered, and you definitely want to thin them out. Okay, one more question. Who's got a good one? No good ones. Okay, well, let's go for a second-rate question.
Okay, yeah, second-rate. Let's say you inherited some number of trees that were probably planted as maidens about 9-10 years ago.
Yeah.
You've lost all of the data about their varieties and their rootstock.
Yeah.
And they've been neglected for that whole time.
Yeah.
So they're really stunted.
Yeah.
And have all of the problems. Apart from trying to do all of the recommendations.
Yeah.
Would you have any other because they've gone past that formative stage
Yeah.
but they're not quite at a mature stage, so you can't really treat them.
Well, you want to come on one of our courses, basically.
Okay, great.
If you live in the West Country, come to one of our courses. We do pruning courses, regenerative renewal pruning on bigger trees. What would you do? Well, if basically I've got about 1 minute. It's a different type of pruning. It's renewal pruning, and what you're doing is thinning out the branches that you don't want completely, so that you get as much light into the branches that you've left. Because growing fruit is all about harvesting sunlight. You want as much light as possible on as many of the branches that are there as possible. So if you've got branches in there that are causing lots of shade, you cut those out entirely, and so that there's light getting on everything that's left. That's kind of the fundamentals of like sorting out old trees that haven't had much work done for a long time in one sentence.
Would there be a point where you might give up
On the tree?
on the tree?
Never. Never give up.
Great, I don't want to.
Never give up. No, you can. If you want, you can pollard that tree and start again. You could, if it's like a complete mess and you don't know what to do, you could cut the whole thing back to like stubs, and it's gonna look like a hedgehog next to you. But then you can start doing this kind of selecting the ones you want, and
Or do it to half of them.
Say again.
Or do it to half of them.
Do it
to half of the trees.
Half the trees.
Yeah, and then you've got some.
Yeah, and then the other half the next year. Is that what you mean? So it's probably it's a hard one to answer quickly, but we're in Devon. If you want to sign up to a course, we've got pruning courses in the spring, cider making course at the end of October. There's some cards here. It's got some. If you want, this is a friend of mine did natural inks. Nice paint. She's going to be very famous one day. These will be worth a lot of money. So they're free. They're free. Anyway, thank you very much. Nice to see you.